Her husband uninvited her from his best friend's wedding by text. One message. No call. 8 words. It's going to be a long night. Don't come. Celeste Okafor-Reyes read it in the parking garage of the venue. Already dressed, already there. 6 months pregnant, her phone screen the only warm light in the cold concrete dark. She set it down. Smoothed her gown. Got out of the car. What Raphael did not know, what no one raising a glass to his name inside that ballroom could have known, was that the woman he had just told to stay home held a 51% majority stake in the very company they were all celebrating. Her father's capital. Her name on the founding document. The $22 million acquisition being toasted that evening could not close without her signature. She had not signed it. Inside, Raphael was already at the microphone, building toward the finest version of himself he had ever performed. His mother, Gloria, sat beaming in the front row, and at the head table, in white, sat Priya, the woman whose name had appeared on a hotel loyalty statement Celeste had been quietly reading for 6 weeks. Derek's new bride. Raphael's other life. Celeste walked through the door. This isn't just a story about a woman who was told she wasn't welcome at a party. It's about what happens when the people who wrote her out of the story discover, too late, that she was holding the deed to every room in it. If that kind of quiet strength speaks to you, hit like and subscribe. This channel is built for you. And drop a comment right now letting us know where in the world you're watching from tonight. But to understand what walked through that door, we have to go back to where this really began. She walked through the doors of the Claremont Ballroom at 8:14 in the evening. The room was exactly what she had imagined. Gold light from the chandeliers, ivory linen on every table, the warm ambient murmur of 200 people who had been drinking long enough to have forgotten that the evening had a formal program. At the far end of the room, on a low stage flanked by white florals, her husband stood at a microphone. Raphael hadn't seen her yet. He was mid-toast. She could tell by his posture, that particular set of his shoulders, chest open, chin tilted slightly upward, the unconscious performance of a man who had practiced this version of himself many times. His voice carried effortlessly across the room. 3 years ago, he was saying, Derek and I sat at a table with 2 laptops and one idea. We had nothing, no backing, no guarantee of anything, and we built something. Celeste stood near the entrance and let the words arrive. She found them, one by one. Gloria Reyes was near the front at a table with Raphael's aunts, her hand resting on the forearm of the woman beside her. Priya Sharma, Derek's wife of 14 hours. Champagne silk. The ease of someone who had been welcome in these rooms long before tonight. What the 200 people in that ballroom did not know, but you do, is that the company Raphael was building his legend around had been funded by the woman standing quietly near the right wall in a burgundy maternity gown, one hand resting on the curve of her stomach. She moved deeper into the room and watched. A stillness settled into her, not resignation, not strategy, something she had no simple word for. It had been there, underneath everything, for 4 years. Then Conrad Lim saw her. He was at a center table, the company attorney, 47 years old, a man who had spent 4 years holding a legal truth about Callaway-Reyes Ventures that its most celebrated founder did not. She watched the color leave his face, watched him set his fork down on the rim of his plate, and not pick it up again. He knew what her presence meant. He knew what the unsigned Nashville authorization meant. He had known both for a very long time. On the stage, Raphael was reaching his conclusion. Tonight I'm announcing that the Nashville acquisition is finalized. $22 million. Built on vision. Built on partnership. Built on the belief that if you want something badly enough, you find a way to build it yourself. The applause came cleanly. Glasses rose. A man standing near Celeste turned to his companion and asked quietly where Raphael's wife was. Raphael answered it himself a moment later, to a small cluster of colleagues at the edge of the room. His voice was easy and warm. She has some pregnancy complications. She's not really up to evenings like this right now. The words reached her. They did not break anything. She kept her shoulders back and her breathing even, and her hands still at her sides, and let it pass through her. Something inside her did not shatter. Something settled, completely, finally, the way still water clears. Conrad was already moving through the crowd toward her. She raised one hand, no higher than her waist, small enough that no one else noticed, and he stopped. She turned her face back toward the stage, where her husband was accepting a handshake from Derek to a second wave of applause. She had waited 4 years for the full shape of this to become visible. She could see it now. The ballroom stayed behind her as she walked. Its warmth and noise softened with each step down the corridor and then disappeared entirely. She did not look back. She needed her father. She found him the way she always did now, in memory, in the study on the 3rd floor of the family house on Awolowo Road in Ikoyi, where the books ran floor to ceiling and the afternoon tea always carried the same particular smell, and Daniel Okafor sat behind his desk with the patience of a man who had built everything he owned from a position of complete stillness. A memory surfaced. 9 years ago. November in Lagos, the rains just finished, the air finally cool. Daniel was 62 years old when Dr. Emeka Nwachukwu described the irregularity in his left ventricle. He listened to the diagnosis, asked 3 questions, drove himself home, and called Celeste into the study that evening. He did not speak about his heart. He spoke about the work. "Sit down," he said. "Pay attention." Over 4 evenings that November, he walked her through the full architecture of the Okafor family's financial holdings. Not because she was unfamiliar with it. She had been reading balance sheets at his kitchen table since she was 16, had understood compound interest before she could drive, but because he wanted her to understand precisely why one specific instrument existed. He set a folder on the desk between them. The label read, OCP Holdings, Celeste A. Okafor, Trustee. "This one is yours," he said. "It has always been yours. Its purpose will become clear when you need it." The structure was simple and exact. If Celeste married and her husband ever co-founded a business venture, OCP Holdings would provide the founding capital, $4.2 million, structured as a silent majority stake, classified as Celeste's separate premarital property under a private trust. The husband's name would appear nowhere on the OCP instruments. The investor would be listed only as OCP Holdings, its beneficial ownership sealed behind 2 layers of corporate privacy. His reasoning came without sentiment. "I have watched too many women," Daniel said, "lose everything the moment a marriage stopped working. I don't intend for that to happen to you." He was 62 years old. He had been watching the world for a long time. 2 years later, Celeste brought Raphael home for the first time. Those early visits were genuinely good. The story would be dishonest to flatten them into something convenient. Raphael at Daniel's dining table, alert and engaged, asking real questions about portfolio strategy and listening to the answers. Raphael helping clear the dishes without being asked, which Daniel noted in the particular way he noticed things, quietly, without comment. Raphael driving 3 hours through Lagos traffic to locate a specific bottle of Merlot, Daniel had mentioned once in passing, arriving at the second dinner with it wrapped in brown paper, as if making it an occasion would have been too much. Daniel approved. He never said so directly. He simply began including Raphael in conversations he normally kept private. He never touched the OCP structure. The prenuptial agreement was prepared by Adaize Nwosu and executed 6 weeks before the wedding. OCP Holdings, separate premarital property of the bride, standard trust provisions, noted Raphael's attorney, a junior partner from a firm on Broad Street who returned his review on a Thursday. Nothing unusual. Raphael signed on a Friday afternoon, pen moving easily across the page, the way people sign documents they have decided contain nothing requiring their full attention. Gloria Reyes attended the wedding in a burgundy suit and embraced Celeste in the receiving line with both hands on her arms. "Welcome," she said. "We are so happy to have you." Her smile was composed and warm and precise. Later, at the reception, just beyond the edge of the music, she leaned toward her sister-in-law and said something the crowd noise swallowed before it could reach Celeste. Celeste didn't hear it. "We do." "Old money," Gloria said softly, with the specific inflection that makes a compliment do the work of a diminishment. "Very nice for her. A shame she doesn't quite seem to know what to do with it." Daniel died 14 months after the wedding. He died on a Thursday afternoon in April at a hospital at Eco Atlantic, with Celeste beside him and the Lagos heat pressing flat against the windows. What he left her, beyond the house, the holdings, the folders dense with margin-annotated reports, was a single handwritten page folded inside the cover of the OCP Holdings founding document. One page. His handwriting, small and exact as always, a full record of his intention, his reasoning, and at the bottom, underlined once in blue ink, a sentence she had read more than 100 times since and never read without the space behind her sternum tightening. Quietly, in a way she couldn't explain to anyone. A quiet stake in the right thing is worth more than a loud claim to everything. The clock on the hotel nightstand read 11:47 when Celeste set the memo on the bedspread and placed her hand on the curve of her stomach. Downstairs, the reception was still audible, a low vibration moving up through the building's bones like something insisting on its own importance. She folded the page along its original crease. Her father had built something solid for her to stand on. She had been standing on it for 4 years without fully understanding the firmness beneath her feet. The marriage had begun so warmly. It had begun with real things, real laughter, real generosity. A man who once drove 3 hours for a bottle of wine because he was paying attention. What happened to that warmth, how it cooled, and what moved into the space it left behind, was the part of the story that needed to come next. The cooling didn't arrive as a single event. It arrived the way cold arrives in a room when someone leaves a window open in autumn, so gradually that by the time you are shivering, you have been shivering for a long time already. It started at the dinner parties. Raphael had always been magnetic at social events, quick, curious, the kind of presence that pulled conversation toward him without appearing to try. What changed, sometime in the 2nd year of the marriage, was what happened in the room when Celeste spoke. A redirect first. A smooth continuation of her point that arrived in his language and his frame, without acknowledgement. Then a habit of gentle explanation that began to accompany anything she said about business or finance, as though her words required clarification before the table could receive them. She remembered one evening in particular. Dinner at the home of Marcus Adeyemi, a property developer Raphael had been cultivating for months. 8 people, good wine, the conversation turning to hospitality valuations. Celeste mentioned a figure, a correct one, from the Callaway-Reyes Q3 filing she had reviewed the week before as part of her OCP oversight. Raphael smiled at her from across the table. "What Celeste means," he said, in the patient, orienting tone of someone clarifying a student's well-intentioned answer, is actually a bit more nuanced than that. Then he explained it. The table listened. She reached for her water glass and waited for the conversation to move on. She didn't challenge it. She told herself he had more context. She told herself he was tired. When the pregnancy became visible, the exclusions followed. Raphael cited her comfort, then her stamina, then the venue itself. These events run late. It's a long drive and you need to rest. The room gets loud. It's not good for the baby. Each reason was different. The outcome was always the same. She stopped going. She told herself it was temporary. Gloria called every Sunday. The calls lasted 20 minutes and arrived, always, with the texture of maternal concern. Warm, specifically aimed, occasionally landing like a stone dropped into still water. I hope you're not putting pressure on yourself, Celeste. Raphael has so much on his mind. And once, with particular softness. Some wives find this season difficult. The things Raphael is managing require a certain kind of focus. I just want to make sure you're not adding to the weight. The pause that followed was exactly long enough to be felt. I'm sure you understand, dear. Celeste would say she understood. She would thank Gloria for calling. She would stand in the kitchen after hanging up and press one hand flat against the counter and take a breath. She doubted herself before she doubted him. This must be said carefully and at full length. She spent months asking whether the distance was her own doing, whether the pregnancy had made her too inward, whether she had stopped showing up in the ways that mattered, whether what felt like contempt was simply the friction of a man under real pressure. She worked harder at patience. She asked fewer questions. She made herself smaller in the rooms where she used to take up space, and she did it willingly, out of something she still believed was love. Then, on a Tuesday evening in March, something arrived in her email. Pacific Crown Hotels. A summary from the joint rewards account she had created 4 years ago, her email as the primary contact. Points accrued. Recent activity. She almost scrolled past it. The activity log showed 11 stays across 8 months. Chicago twice, Miami 3 times, Atlanta, Houston. Midweek dates, the pattern of someone traveling for business, 2 names on the account. Hers, as primary member. And a second authorized traveler, added 14 months ago, whose name she did not recognize. She read it twice. She set her phone face down on the kitchen table. Her hands were still. She made a point of noticing that. The name meant nothing to her yet. Give it 8 months. For 6 weeks she held the document up to every explanation that could make it innocent. A booking error, an account merged with a colleague's by mistake, a system error she hadn't caught. She examined each theory the way her father had taught her to examine any document she didn't yet understand, patiently, without rushing toward a conclusion. But the logic kept giving way. By the 5th week, she was no longer looking for an explanation. She was preparing herself for the absence of one. On a Monday evening in May, she opened the full account history. 47 entries, 3 years of travel, 14 months of a second name. She closed the laptop. She called Adaiz. I need you to open a file, Celeste said. Nothing formal yet, just a file. I'll start it tonight, Adaiz said. 4 minutes. The call was over. The following Sunday, Gloria called to tell Celeste she really ought to make more effort to be visible at Raphael's company events. It matters what people see, she said gently. You should show up, dear. For his sake. Celeste said she understood. She thanked Gloria for her concern. She retrieved the Pacific Crown statement from her email, printed it, folded it once along a clean crease, and placed it inside a manila folder. On the tab, she wrote the date in full, the way her father had taught her to label anything that might someday matter. The file was open. Something was taking shape inside it. She didn't have the name yet. But patience, she had discovered, was a skill that worked equally well in both directions. She was getting closer. She was standing at the pharmacy counter at DeLuca's on West 34th when her card declined. The cashier, Keisha, whose name tag had a small red star sticker on it, ran it twice, and looked up with the particular expression of someone trying to be kind about something unkind. "Is there another card you'd like to try?" Celeste said she would check her bag. She stood with her hands quiet at her sides and found the debit card she hadn't used in months. She paid for the prenatal vitamins, the iron supplements, and the extra support pillow her OB had recommended. She carried the bag to her car and sat with both hands in her lap for a moment before starting the engine. 2 weeks earlier, Raphael had mentioned at dinner that their accounts were being simplified for the next phase. Consolidated in preparation for the baby's arrival, he said, with the ease of someone referencing a mutually agreed plan. Her personal card, linked to a joint account she hadn't thought to separate, had been frozen as part of the consolidation. He called it financial planning. He said it with warmth and with no question directed toward her. While he spoke, the OCP Holdings trust account, which he could not access and did not know existed, held her quarterly distribution of $187,000. Untouched. Hers. She opened a private account at First Federal Credit Union the following Tuesday, funded by OCP distributions. She did this without telling anyone. The OB appointment came next. Her monthly check-in with Dr. Patricia Sawande at Riverside Women's Health had been pushed back 3 weeks, a clerical error, Raphael said, from when he'd called about an insurance question. When Celeste called the clinic directly, the receptionist confirmed the appointment had been canceled in full and rebooked for a later date. He did not raise it again. She gave the clinic her own number as the sole contact going forward. Gloria had been making calls. Celeste assembled this over 6 weeks from disparate sources. A cousin of Raphael's who mentioned Celeste was going through a difficult time. A care package from a family friend referencing her situation. A woman from her prenatal group at Riverside who said the Reyes family had mentioned Celeste was struggling. Was there anything she needed? The narrative had been built before Celeste had done anything to earn it. Celeste was overwhelmed. Celeste was not managing well. Celeste was a concern. The frame was being constructed while the room it was meant to contain still stood perfectly empty. Gloria arrived on a Saturday morning in April to inspect the nursery. She brought a casserole and moved through the room with the quiet authority of someone completing an assessment, touching things, pausing at others. "The dresser is too close to the window. Drafts will be a problem." She examined the crib placement and made a small sound. Then she settled into the rocking chair Celeste had chosen and looked at her carefully. "I hope you're letting Raphael take the lead on things, dear. You really should be resting more. I just want to make sure you're coping." Celeste thanked her for the casserole and held the door. She stood at the kitchen counter after Gloria's car left, both palms flat on the cool surface, and took 3 measured breaths. Then, on an afternoon in late May, she opened the Callaway-Reyes Ventures social media account on her laptop. She had been following it since the company's launch. She scrolled backward through 14 months of posts. The year-end gala at the Pemberton Hotel, the Q2 strategy dinner, the Nashville groundbreaking in October, the hospitality platform launch in the spring. In the background of each photograph, sometimes at the center, sometimes to the side, always present, was a face she recognized from Derek Callaway's personal account. His girlfriend. Then, in the later posts, his fiancée, Priya Sharma. Celeste sat with the photographs for a long time. Something in her chest pulled tight, and she held it still until it resolved into something controlled. The woman in the hotel rooms, 3 cities, 8 months. Marrying Raphael's business partner in 6 weeks. She had not been excluded from those company events because of the pregnancy. The pregnancy had been a useful explanation. She had been excluded because the woman who filled her seat at those tables was already in the room. The full architecture of the last 14 months resolved into its true shape. She thought of her father briefly, his voice on the voicemail she had never deleted, steady and quiet. I have watched too many women lose everything. She had not lost anything. She had been watching. Now she understood what she had been watching for. The OCP Holdings Q2 filing arrived from Adaiz the following week. Highlighted in yellow on the cover page, the Nashville acquisition approaching final close. Parties confirmed. One item outstanding. OCP Holdings written authorization. Celeste A. Okafor's signature. $22 million. Waiting. She set the authorization on her desk. She placed her father's handwritten memo on top of it. She did not sign it. In 6 weeks, every piece of this would be in the same room at the same time. 6 weeks later, every piece of it was. The Claremont Ballroom held close to 200 guests, and by 8 o'clock, the room had reached the temperature of a celebration that has been eating and drinking long enough to feel inevitable. The warmth where no one questions the occasion because it already feels deserved. The florals were white. The lights were gold. The speeches were beginning. During the cocktail hour, Raphael had made his rounds. He was magnetic in these rooms, specific, unhurried, the kind of man who finds you across a crowd and makes you feel, for the duration of his attention, like the most relevant person in it. He moved between clusters with the ease of someone who had been preparing this version of himself for a long time. When Jonathan Hargrove of Hospitality Today asked after his wife, the response came without a pause. She's having some pregnancy complications. Not serious, but these kinds of events really aren't suitable right now. A faint suggestion of private weight, born gracefully. We made the decision together. Hargrove made a note in the small reporter's pad he kept inside his jacket pocket. Celeste was still in the parking garage when he said it. Priya Sharma was standing 4 feet away. She heard every word. She looked at a fixed point past Raphael's left shoulder and said nothing. Conrad Lim, at the edge of the group, set his drink down and excused himself. What none of them knew, what Hargrove would not know when he filed his profile the following week, was that the woman with pregnancy complications was the silent, controlling partner of every deal being celebrated that evening. On every OCP Holdings document, she was not Celeste Okafor-Reyes. She was Celeste A. Okafor. Trustee, 51% majority holder, the single signature the Nashville acquisition had been waiting on for 6 weeks. Before dinner began, Gloria Reyes found the head table. She embraced Derek first. Then she turned to Priya, and the greeting was not the greeting you give a new acquaintance. She touched Priya's arm at the elbow, a specific and practiced gesture, and said quietly, "You look beautiful tonight, sweetheart." Priya smiled with the ease of someone long comfortable with this warmth. The timeline, for anyone still counting, was 14 months. The dinner program began. The stage lights came up. Gloria spoke first. She spoke for 4 minutes about her son, with the fluency of someone who had been composing this particular version for years. His discipline, his vision, the company he had built from the ground up with nothing but his own intelligence and determination. She praised Derek Calloway, his partner from the beginning. She spoke about what it meant to watch a son become the man she had always believed he would be. She did not say Celeste's name. Not once in 4 minutes. The room applauded. Then Raphael took the stage. He had written it himself. You could hear it in how it built, the self-deprecating opening that made the room laugh, the founding narrative about 2 laptops and 1 idea, the escalating recitation of milestones each attributed to vision and personal conviction. The word self-made never appeared directly. It lived in every sentence, regardless. The audience carries 4 chapters of context through what follows. The $4.2 million that made this company possible came not from Raphael's vision or discipline. It came from a private trust. From a father who had watched too many women lose their footing. From a daughter trained, since she was 16 years old, to understand exactly what she was holding. 3 years ago we had nothing, Raphael said. No guarantee, no outside validation, no safety net. We believed in what we were building, and we built it. The room was completely with him. Tonight I can tell you officially, the Nashville acquisition is finalized, $22 million. He let the number sit in the room for a moment. Built on vision. Built on partnership. Built on the belief that if you want something badly enough, you find a way to build it yourself. Conrad Lim, at a center table, set his water glass down without sound. His expression went flat and stayed there through the full length of the applause, the specific flatness of a man who has just heard something stated publicly that he knows privately to be false, and who possesses no mechanism available to him to say so. The applause filled the ballroom, and then ebbed into the warm noise of 200 people who believed without reservation in what they had just witnessed. 1 floor above, in a room on the 4th level of this same building, a document lay on a desk beside a handwritten memo with a blue underline at the bottom. OCP Holdings' written authorization for the Nashville acquisition. The signature line was blank. Missing. She had not signed it. Not that week, not in the months before, and not tonight. 1 floor below, 200 people were raising their glasses to $22 million without knowing the deal was still, entirely, hers to close. 1 floor above the reception, a laptop opened. The reception was still going when she reached her room. She could hear it through the floor. Not clearly, but as a warmth in the building's structure, the way a crowd sounds from a distance when you no longer belong to it. She set her bag on the chair by the window and looked out for a moment at the hotel's rear garden, still lit, the catering tables visible below. Then she opened her laptop. The OCP Holdings acquisition file was organized the way her father had always organized files, by function, not by date. The top folder was labeled Nashville, Final Authorization Package. Inside it, the purchase agreement, the closing conditions, the title review, the financing terms, and on the final page, the authorization memo requesting OCP Holdings' written consent to proceed. She read everything, not the summary. Everything. She had reviewed each document as Adaze forwarded it in the months prior, but she read it again now, beginning to end, the way her father had taught her. Once for comprehension, once for consequence. She was a trained financial analyst before this marriage had quietly asked her to become something else. That training had not left her. It had simply been waiting. The deal was what she already knew it to be. A well-structured acquisition for a Nashville mid-market hotel, clean title, sound projections, a purchase price that reflected genuine market value. Good work. The company Raphael had built his public story around was, in fact, a well-run operation. And at its foundation, $4.2 million of Okafor capital. One signature was missing. The reception hummed below. She took the handwritten memo from the inside pocket of her bag. She had moved it there when she repacked that afternoon, wanting it accessible. 1 page. Her father's small, precise script. The blue underline at the bottom. She read it. She had read it many times in the 2 years since she found it folded inside the OCP founding document. In Lagos, the week after the funeral, holding his reading glasses in her other hand. In the apartment, during one of Raphael's late returns, at the kitchen table with the overhead light on. At the OB's office once, waiting, when it had been the only wait she was sure of. Each time, it had meant what it said. Tonight, reading it in a fourth-floor hotel room 1 floor above her husband's professional celebration, it meant something different. Or rather, it meant precisely what it had always meant, and she finally understood why he had written it. A quiet stake in the right thing is worth more than a loud claim to everything. It was not a comfort. It was not a consolation. It was a description of a specific kind of power, the kind that does not announce itself, does not ask for acknowledgement, does not speak until the moment arrives when silence would be the wrong choice. Daniel had not built the OCP structure out of pessimism or distrust. He had built it out of a very long view of the world. He had known that one day the right thing would need to speak for itself, and he had made sure it could. She placed the memo on the desk. She picked up her phone and called Adeze. The call connected on the second ring. "I need you to prepare the formal OCP shareholder notice," Celeste said. "I need you at the brunch tomorrow. 9 a.m., bring the founding capital agreement, the full cap table, and the original authorization memo." A brief pause. Not surprise. Adeze had spent 4 years watching this situation develop, at the pace it was always going to develop. She absorbed the instructions and confirmed them. "Everything will be prepared tonight," she said. "I'll be at the entrance at 8:50. "Thank you." 7 minutes. The call ended. Celeste set the phone on the nightstand and looked at the ceiling for a moment. Below, someone gave a toast. She couldn't make out the words, only the shape of a voice over a crowd. And then the applause. She set the wake-up call for 6:30. She turned off the lamp. Her body was tired in the particular, carrying way it had been for months. The weight low in her back, the pressure across her ribs where the baby had been active since afternoon. She moved the memo to the nightstand, where she would reach it first in the morning and lay down. She was not enduring this. She was not absorbing it, not holding it at a careful distance, not letting it pass through her. She had been doing those things for 4 years. She was done. She was deciding. The decision had already been made. Tomorrow was documentation. She slept. The alarm sounded at 6:30. Celeste dressed in the gray wool blazer and dark trousers she had packed as a secondary outfit. She lifted her father's memo from the nightstand, folded it along its original crease, and placed it in the inside pocket of her bag, against her chest. She checked the room once. She picked up the bag. She took the elevator to the lobby. The brunch room was assembled 1 floor below. Adeze Nwosu was waiting at the entrance with a dark document folder under one arm and her coat folded over the other. The brunch room was on the 2nd floor of the hotel, overlooking the rear garden where the wedding florals were still arranged in their vases from the night before. A long table set for 12, white linen, morning light through tall windows, coffee urns on a side table, the kind of room designed for celebrations that continue into the next day. The Calloway and Reyes families were already seated when Celeste arrived at the door at 9:01 a.m. Raphael was at the table's midpoint, leaning toward Derek on his left, speaking in a low voice about something. Priya was seated across from Derek, a coffee cup in front of her, posture carefully arranged. Gloria was 2 seats from Priya, pearl earrings, her back to the window. Conrad Lim was near the far end of the table, facing the door, and he saw Celeste first. He did not make a sound. But Raphael, who had spent years reading the small shifts in a room's attention, noticed Conrad go still. He turned. Raphael's expression moved through several things quickly. First, surprise, genuine and unperformed. Second, the involuntary recalculation of a man trying to determine what her presence required of him. Third, when Adeze stepped through the door immediately behind her with the dark folder under her arm. Something that arrived in his jaw before it reached his eyes. Celeste took the empty chair at the head of the table. She placed her bag on the floor. She folded her hands on the linen. The room was watching. Adaze walked directly to Raphael's position, placed one document in front of him without comment, and without changing course, delivered a second to Conrad Lim at the far end. Both movements were precise and unhurried. "This is a formal shareholder notice," she said, addressing the room with the even voice of someone reading a legal instrument, because that is what she was doing. "OCP Holdings, the controlling majority partner of Okafor-Reyes Ventures, is formally calling a mandatory shareholder meeting. The Nashville acquisition is suspended pending that meeting." The word "suspended" landed on the white linen like something dropped from a height. The woman he had once patiently explained venture capital to at a dinner table, in front of colleagues, in the voice of a man clarifying something elementary, was the only person in that room whose signature could authorize the Nashville deal. That fact was now documented and formal and witnessed by 12 people. Raphael looked at the notice, then at Adaeze. "OCP Holdings is an institutional backer. This doesn't make sense." Adaeze produced a second document from her folder. "The founding capital agreement," she said, "executed 3 years ago, $4.2 million in seed capital from OCP Holdings, structured as a silent 51% majority stake in Okafor-Reyes Ventures. The beneficial owner of OCP Holdings, as specified in Section 4 of the trust instrument, is Celeste A. Okafor." She did not say Celeste Okafor-Reyes. She said the name that appeared on every company document, every trust instrument, every quarterly filing that had passed through this company's legal history for 3 years. Celeste A. Okafor. The room went still. Raphael's composure held, but it was being held now rather than existing naturally, the difference visible in the set of his jaw, in the particular stillness of a man who is working to maintain something rather than simply being it. He looked at the document. He looked at Celeste. She looked back at him with the calm of someone who had been sitting with this information for a very long time and was no longer carrying it alone. Conrad set the papers flat in front of him. He had read them already. He was reading them again. "Mr. Lim," Adaze said, "in your capacity as legal counsel for Okafor-Reyes Ventures, can you confirm the validity of the founding capital agreement as executed?" Conrad looked at the document, then briefly at Raphael, with the expression of a man who has arrived at the intersection of his professional obligation and his personal loyalty and understands that his profession wins. "The agreement is valid as executed," he said. One sentence, no qualification. Derek Calloway had not spoken. He was looking at Celeste with the flat, recalibrating expression of a man understanding in real time that the founding story, the 2 laptops, the single idea, the nothing they had started from, had never been the complete story. The company he had toasted the night before, the one he had built his professional identity around, had been capitalized by the woman he had watched be excluded from its events for 14 months, while someone else sat in her seat. Gloria said, "I don't understand what this is supposed to—" "Mrs. Reyes." Adaze's voice did not shift register by a single degree. "You have no standing in this proceeding. I'd ask that you allow us to complete it." Gloria's mouth closed. She looked at her son. Raphael was looking at Celeste. What crossed his face was not anger, not yet. What arrived before the anger was the thing the audience has been waiting 6 chapters to see. The specific, private recognition of a man who understands, completely and for the first time, what he chose to dismantle. He had told her she wasn't well enough to attend events. He had canceled her appointments. He had explained the world to her at dinner tables. He had let his mother tell their family she was not managing well, and she had sat across from him for 4 years, in possession of the document now lying between them on the white linen, and had never once moved against him until there was no other honest choice. He looked at her composure, at her hands folded on the table, at the small, steady curve of her pregnancy beneath her blazer, and something behind his eyes collapsed quietly. Priya Sharma moved her chair. Not dramatically, not with announcement. A quiet shift of 5 inches to her right, away from Raphael and toward the neutral space beside her. The movement of someone whose calculations had just completed. Derek saw it. He said nothing. Raphael turned to Celeste. His voice had shed its performance and arrived at something rawer. "Celeste, whatever you need from this, there are ways to handle this that don't have to—" She let him finish. Then she looked at him with steady eyes. "OCP Holdings calls a shareholder meeting," she said. "Monday, 9 a.m. She turned to Adiz. "Thank you." She picked up her bag. She stood. She walked out of the brunch room and closed the door behind her with the careful, deliberate sound of someone who has completed what they came to do. The room did not move for several seconds after the door closed. 6 weeks later, the shape of everything had changed. The shape of what followed is best told in sequence. The Nashville acquisition restructured under new terms negotiated by OCP Holdings and its representatives over 3 weeks. The Sycamore Hotel Group, the purchasing party, agreed to the revised conditions. The deal closed. Okafor-Reyes Ventures moved forward. But the company it moved forward as, with its cap table now a matter of formal public record, was not the company that had been toasted in the Claremont ballroom. 2 business editors who had profiled Raphael in the preceding 2 years received fact-checker inquiries about the founding capital attribution. One ran a correction. The other quietly updated their online version without announcement. Priya Sharma filed for annulment from Derek Calloway 19 days after their wedding, citing undisclosed conflicts of interest in the circumstances surrounding the marriage. The proceedings were brief and uncontested. Gloria Reyes called Celeste's number on the 3rd day after the brunch, and again on the 5th, and once more on the 11th. After that, the calls stopped. It had taken her 11 days to understand that calling no longer did what she needed it to do. The silence that followed was not the silence of resolution. It was the silence of a woman recalibrating a story that had turned out to have a different ending. Raphael left 17 voicemails over the 6 weeks. Celeste did not listen to any of them, not because she couldn't bring herself to, but because she had nothing left to use them for. They accumulated in her phone like letters addressed to a version of herself who no longer lived at that address. Then the scene softened into something quieter. Adiz handled the formal proceedings from Lagos. Celeste's new apartment, a 2-bedroom on the 3rd floor of a building in Ikoyi, 12 minutes from the house on Awolowo Road, with a window that faced east over the garden, had been arranged while the legal work moved forward. She moved in on a Wednesday in early September. She unpacked slowly, in the way of someone who knows exactly where they are going. On a Saturday afternoon in October, 8 weeks from the end of her pregnancy, Celeste drove to the house on Awolowo Road and let herself in with the key her father had given her when she was 23. She walked through the hallway and up the stairs to the study on the 3rd floor, where the books still ran floor to ceiling, and the afternoon light came through the windows at the angle she had always known. She sat down at his desk. She opened the folder she had brought in her bag, the folder she had carried to the hotel, to the brunch room, through the hardest 6 months of her adult life, and she lifted out the handwritten memo. 1 page, his small, precise script, the blue underline at the bottom. She read it. For the 3rd time in 2 years, she read her father's last line, and this time there was nothing to interpret. It did not arrive as protection as it had the first time. It did not arrive as instruction as it had the second. It arrived as something that was simply, completely, already true. The kind of truth that has been lived and tested and confirmed until it no longer needs explanation, because you have become the person the words were written for. She read the line. She nodded once. That was all. A quiet stake in the right thing is worth more than a loud claim to everything. She set the memo on the desk. She sat in her father's chair, in her father's study, listening to the afternoon sounds of Lagos through the tall windows, the traffic on Awolowo Road, a vendor's voice from the corner, the particular smell of the garden below where the lignum vitae tree her father had planted 30 years ago still stood against the wall, unchanged. The baby moved. Not a kick, a slow, rolling shift, like someone settling into a space they have decided is theirs. This is what the story is, at its deepest level. Not the story of a woman who won. It is the story of a woman who was prepared. Her father built something in the quiet, with patience and foresight, and she carried it without knowing precisely when it would matter. And when it mattered, it was enough. Power that does not announce itself does not need to. It simply waits for the moment when silence would be the wrong choice, and then it speaks. In the end, the majority was never the one with the loudest claim. It was the woman in her father's chair, who had held the ground for 4 years without once announcing that the ground was hers. Have you ever carried something quietly for a long time, waiting for the moment it needed to speak? Leave it in the comments below, and tell us where in the world you're watching from tonight. Celeste placed her hand on the warm curve of her stomach. She closed her father's folder. "Papa," she said, quietly, just his name, to no one in particular. Then there was silence, and then the baby moved.